Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we will be recapping Day 5 of the second round of the NHL playoffs. 3 games on the day, as a series ended up going for a back-to-back. That was the Bruins Lightning. But first on the day was an afternoon one. Flyers versus Islanders. Flyers looking to tie up this series, and they would manage to do so with the 4-3 overtime victory. And this one started off quite well for the Flyers. They would get the first 3 goals of this game from Hayes twice, and then Couturier's first of the playoffs. But then, slowly but surely, as the Islanders are known to do, they come back in this game. They get a goal from Lee, then a goal from Beauvillier, and then a goal late in the third period from Pajot to tie this one up. But in overtime, it would be Philip Myers for the Flyers taking the win, and as I said, tying the series up at 1. So good news for the Flyers. They managed to score 4 goals against this Islanders team. That is something that no team in the playoffs has actually done just yet. So that is, pretty nice to see, obviously. And they got some of their top players more activated. That was obviously a big problem for them, not just in Game 1 against the Islanders, but through these entire playoffs thus far. Yes, Giroux not yet on the scoreboard here in terms of goals, but Couturier gets his first, Hayes gets a couple, so it is a decent sign moving forward for the Flyers. The bad news is that after a pretty strong first period, they really seem to just lay off and let the Islanders run all over them. The Islanders, the fact that they managed to come back from 3 goals down here is pretty harsh for the Flyers, considering they probably should have been able to hold this lead down. And while they end up cleaning it up in the overtime anyway, it's not a great sign that this is something that ended up happening. You want it so that if you can score 3 goals against the Islanders, you want to be able to secure that victory. And the fact that this one almost went the other way is not great. The Flyers, they need to keep up this offensive pressure, but hold off on what the Islanders can actually do offensively themselves. In terms of good news for the Islanders is the fact that for once again they showed this resiliency. Of all the teams in the playoffs thus far, there are such high-scoring teams like the Avalanche, the Lightning themselves, the Golden Knights, and yet the Islanders are one of the best teams remaining in the playoffs at actually coming back from a deficit just because they want it so much. They're such a hungry team. They really, really want to win. It's sort of like the trademark of a Barry Trotz team here. And so they managed to come back in this game, which is obviously a huge thing for them. Beauvillier continues to be very good for them. Pajot continues to score these really clutch goals for them. So that's all good. The bad news for the Islanders is that it has to be Semyon Varlamov. He's a goaltender who I haven't really mentioned all that much in these playoffs, mostly because the Islanders as a unit would really win defensively, and it's not necessarily that Varlamov is really standing out as some sort of fantastic goaltender. I mean, this is the first playoff game that the Islanders have actually given up 30-plus shots, and this one actually went to overtime, and so, clearly the Islanders are playing a good defensive system, and Varlamov is not sheltered necessarily, but isn't really called upon to be all that great. But early in this game, he actually gives up 3 goals and gets chased. It was not a great early for Varlamov. Thomas Greiss comes in. I didn't have a huge problem with this. While Greiss has not played in these playoffs just yet, I believe this is a situation in which it's not really an elimination game, so it's not the worst thing in the world, and the fact that Greiss was pretty solid for them during the regular season as well. And so this is a good rest for Varlamov going into tomorrow's game. It is a back-to-back for the Flyers and the Islanders, and so I suspect Varlamov will be right back between the pipes, but it is a bit of a worry here for this team. The next series was Bruins versus Lightning, playing their Game 3 to see which team would take the 2-1 series lead, and the first couple of games were extremely close, but this one not so much. The Lightning win it 7-1. The third time, I believe, in these playoffs that we've seen a 7-1 score, which is kind of surprising. But it starts off with a Palat goal, then Gourde adds to it, Sergachev makes it 3-0 before Marchand on the power play makes it 3-1, but the Lightning would then run away with it. Goals from Killorn, then Point, then Killorn again, and finally Kucherov would end the night 7-1 victory. The Lightning looking really offensively strong in this one. The first time in these playoffs, really, that we have seen the Lightning explode offensively, considering their first series against the Blue Jackets was quite defensively focused. And the good news for the Tampa Bay Lightning is exactly that. They exploded offensively, scoring from all around the lineup. Their top players like Kucherov, Point, their middle six type of players like Palat, like Killorn, their defense like Sergachev, and even, their bottom six forwards like Yanni Gourde contributing on the action, and we saw Blake Coleman, another bottom six forwards, get a couple of goals last game for the Lightning. So right now getting some really balanced scoring. It was, as I said, something we didn't see much of in that Columbus Blue Jackets series. They managed to win that series anyhow, but it wasn't a high scoring series, and it's good to see that they managed to explode in this situation. In terms of bad news, I honestly can't think of much. This was a very good game from the Tampa Bay Lightning. This wasn't a game where they just capitalized on a few key opportunities, but it was a game that they really took it to the Boston Bruins, and that really carries us into the good news for the Boston Bruins, which is basically nothing. In fact, this reminds me a lot of that 5-0 victory by the Golden Knights in Game 1 of their series, where I couldn't really think of much bad for the Knights, and I couldn't think of much good for the Canucks. In terms of bad news for the Bruins is, of course, that it was just a complete team failure here tonight. Just the Bruins probably looked their worst that they have ever looked here in these playoffs thus far. Just really bad play from them. As I said, the two games that the Bruins had lost previously in these playoffs were two games that were lost by just a single goal. But this one, 7-1 loss, pretty disastrous. Halak ended up getting pulled in this game. As I've pointed out many times, he is a bit of a weak link in this situation. Tuukka Rask decided to opt out of playing in the playoffs, so Halak was called upon, and that actually left their now backup goalie, who was their third string goaltender. And with Halak getting pulled, that third string goaltender ended up having to play. And unfortunately, he tried his best, certainly, but he wasn't necessarily all that good enough, and the Bruins definitely didn't give him any of support. I suspect Halak will almost certainly, well, I shouldn't even say almost certainly, he absolutely will be back in nets for Game 4, but is his confidence shaken? Will he be able to rebound from that? That could be a really big question mark of whether or not the Bruins can get back in this series, or if the Lightning might now run away with it. And finally, the last game of the day was Stars versus Avalanche, and an even crazier one than the previous. The previous one was a bit one-sided with the Lightning offensively exploding, but this one definitely back and forth. It starts off with a Tyler Seguin goal to make it 1-0 Stars. Then the Avalanche would score 3 straight from Zadorov, Burakovsky, and Landeskog. Then the Stars would get one to make it 3-2 from Guryanov, and then quick succession in the third period would get 2 goals from Como and then Ben to make it 4-3 Stars, and seemingly they had once again come back from a deficit and we're going to close this game out, but a crucial mistake leads to a 2-on-1 with McKinnon and Rantanen that ties the game, and then Kadri manages to make it 5-4 Avalanche. Eventually an empty netter is added and by Bellemare, and it's a 6-4 victory for the Avalanche. They finally get on the board in this series, the Stars still leading it 2-1. Good news for the Avalanche. I had pointed out in the previous 2 games it was really just McKinnon doing everything here for the Avalanche, with Rantanen and Landeskog somewhat supporting him. But finally the Avalanche getting some depth scoring here that we saw that they had in that first series against the Coyotes. Their defensemen scoring with Zadorov, Burakovsky as well adding a goal. Bellemare with the empty netter is obviously nice to see. Kadri getting back on top of things after a spectacular start to these playoffs. And so the Avalanche, they had been getting outscored by the Stars. The Stars were really just putting up a lot of goals, and that was the case here again today. But finally, the Avalanche can match that and even surpass it, with some of their depth scoring really showing up in this one. The bad news, it has to be at the goaltending position. Grubauer ended up getting injured in that first game, so Francouz has been starting for the Avalanche. And, he was quite respectable during the regular season, but the Stars, for whatever reason, seem to be just on fire offensively, and Francouz is not necessarily doing that much to help out the Avalanche in this situation. He looks just not necessarily all that confident between the pipes, and in this situation, he did end up managing, I guess, to outduel Anton Khudobin, but if I had, money to spend here, I would probably be betting that on Khudobin being better than Francouz. And so what needs to happen is that Avalanche offense needs to be better and more consistent than the Stars offense, which honestly, I'd probably put money on that there as well. So it'll be interesting to see which of those really wins out as we move further in this series. The good news for the Stars, they're once again showing the resiliency. It's been pointed out so many times. They had this 1-0 lead, but they dropped it down to 3-1, and it was a great move that they were able to come back from that, make it 4-3, but the fact that they end up throwing that is what is really their bad news, is that they continuously play with fire here. They continuously play with getting into these deficits, and this is just something that's not necessarily sustainable in these playoffs. A team like the Avalanche is so quick to strike on these goals that you have to be a lot better defensively than the Stars have been. And so they need to be more consistent defensively as well. And so they end up giving up 5 goals in this game, plus the empty netter. It's not a great look. Khudobin didn't have a very good game at all. And as it is with the Boston Bruins, although it's different in this situation because Ben Bishop did not opt out, but is in fact injured, the Stars don't really have another goaltender to fall back on. So Khudobin is sort of ride or die at this point. And this game, not so great for him. We'll see again, as I said, how this balance of offense and goaltending will actually work out for both of these teams moving forward. In terms of predictions, I had said the Islanders would win in 6 games. The Flyers getting this one and seeing how the Islanders really responded in this one makes me pretty confident in that prediction. For the Bruins and Lightning, I had said the Lightning would win out in 7 games. I do have faith that the Lightning can get this victory. Will it still go 7 games? I'm not necessarily as confident as I was yesterday. And for the Stars versus Avalanche, I said the Avalanche would win it in 6. This is still looking pretty not necessarily likely to happen. The Avalanche would have to win out in this series, which I don't know if that's going to occur. But it at least is looking better than it did after Game 2. Class dismissed.